This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
A young lady had decided that she was going to wait and save herself for marriage. But her college roommate had not made that decision. In fact, her college roommate often tried to get her to be like her, tried to get her to go out and have sex with somebody. Often she would say, what are you doing this Friday night? You need to go partying with me. You need to go hook up with a guy. It's so much fun. You'll enjoy it so much. You need to live a little. She did that weekend after weekend. Tried to pressure this young lady to have sex before she was married. Used all the old lines. Everybody's doing it. It's fun. You'll like it, etc. One Friday, the young lady who had decided to save herself from marriage decided that she had had enough of that. And she looked her college roommate in the eye and said, do you know that any night of any week, I can go out and I can have sex with a guy and I can be exactly like you. But you can never be like me again. You know, that's the truth. Once you have sex outside of marriage, you will never be able to take your virginity back. It's something that you give up. It's not something that you get a second chance at. 80% of all the girls who have sex before marriage say that they wish they had not done that. Some 60% of all the guys who have sex before they're married say they wish they had not done that. What you rarely ever see on any TV commercial or any of the TV shows that you're watching is the guy or the girl that says that was the worst decision of my life. Do you know, rarely, I have never talked to some person that said, boy, if I would have just only had more sex with people in high school, I would have a better life right now. Never talked to a person who said, if I could have just gotten with more guys or girls when I was in college before I got married, I think I'd be doing better now. Almost every person that you'll ever talk to says, I wish I had waited. I hope that what we're discussing about sex will help you not be one of those people who has to say, I wish I had waited. I hope that it will help you be one of those people who does wait. And here's what we're going to discuss in this lesson. We're going to discuss the physical consequences of choosing to decide to have sex before marriage. Not pregnancy, because we discussed that last time. We're going to discuss sexually transmitted diseases. Now, I'm going to ask you to fill in a blank for me. So when I say the first word, I just want you to fill in the next word. It's pretty simple, so little audience participation here. Safe. Fill in the blank for me. Let's go. Safe.
Sex.
Safe.
Sex.
Safe.
Sex.
Safe sex. Now, I didn't tell you to say sex. There are lots of things that can be safe. Safe driving, safe boating, safe, all kinds of things that can be safe. Why is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the term safe, the next word, the first thing that comes just about to everybody's mind? Sex. Well, because we are taught that there is a way to have sex before you're married and it can be safe. Did you know the only safe sex anywhere to be had is sex between one man and one woman in a monogamous relationship? That means not with anybody else for life. Now, that's what the Bible says, but you don't necessarily have to take the Bible's word for that. Let me give you what the Center for Disease Control says about virtually every single sexually transmitted disease. I want to read this to you. It says, the surest way to avoid transmission of STDs is to abstain from sexual intercourse or to be in a long-term mutually monogamous relationship with a partner who has been tested and is known to be uninfected. Don't have sex or get married and have sex with one person for the rest of your life. Now, that's the Center for Disease Control. That's just the government telling you if you don't want a sexually transmitted disease, that's how you need to have sex in your life with one person, get married, or don't have intercourse at all. That's the only safe sex. Do you know that 40% of teenagers who were asked said that they thought that pills like birth control pills or other things that were birth control would keep them from getting a sexually transmitted disease? That means 40 out of every 100 of the teenagers who were asked thought that, yeah, well, if I'm on the pill, that means I won't get a sexually transmitted disease. Do you know that birth control, as far as the pill or Norplant or Depo-Provera, those don't keep you from getting any sexually transmitted diseases? In fact, if a girl is on the pill, she has a 10 times more likely chance of getting a sexually transmitted disease than one who is not. Because many times she thinks that the pill is going to keep her from getting a sexually transmitted disease, which it is not going to do. In fact, it won't help her at all. It will increase her chances. Now, if we were to look at the only safe sex, that would be sex between one man and one woman in a marriage relationship. But now you're told on all of the condom commercials that, oh, if you will use our particular brand of condom, this will be safe. We said in the previous lesson, you can get every single sexually transmitted disease while wearing a condom. In fact, HPV, one of the most often passed sexually transmitted diseases, condoms give you little or no protection against human papillomavirus. And that is one of the many, in fact, all of them you can catch while one of the partners is wearing a condom. A condom is not going to keep you from getting a sexually transmitted disease. They say, yes, but it makes it safer. Is that true? Does it lower the chance of you getting some sexually transmitted disease? Yes, that's true. It lowers the chance of you getting a few sexually transmitted diseases. It makes it safer. Now, what does that mean that it's safer? Let's look at that just for a second. Suppose I had a gun up here. Let's say it was a revolver, and it has 6 cylinders. I don't know if you're familiar with the game Russian roulette. Russian roulette is where a person takes a bullet, puts it in a cylinder of a 6-cylinder revolver, spins it around and they don't look, flips the cylinder into the gun, pulls the trigger back and points it at their head. And then they pull the trigger and hope that the cylinder that it landed on is not one of the 6 that had the bullet. You got an 18% chance of shooting yourself in the head playing Russian roulette. Now suppose that we have a cylinder of a gun and we put 4 bullets in it, leaving only 2 open spots. And we spin the cylinder, flip it over, pull the trigger and stick it to our heads. Is Russian roulette in that case a safe game? Well, there's a chance you won't shoot yourself in the head. Does that make it safe? Well, it doesn't make it safe just because there's a chance you're not going to shoot yourself in. And the people who are trying to sell you condoms say, well, hold on just a second, let me see that gun, let me see that. So they take the gun and they take 2 of those out. And they say, get rid of these 2. Okay, now we've made this safe for you. And now they give you back a gun that's got 2 bullets in 2 of those cylinders. They spin it around, flip it around, and say, oh, now here, this is safe for you to play with. Is it now safe for you to pull the trigger and stick it up to your head? It's not safe. Now, do you have a less chance of shooting yourself in the head? Yes, but is there still a pretty good chance you're going to shoot yourself in the head? Sure there is. Just because you lower the chance doesn't mean that what you're doing is safe. It might mean that it's safer than what you were doing, but that absolutely doesn't mean that it's safe at all. So when we think of the term safe sex, the only sex that is safe is sex between one man and one woman for life in a marriage relationship. That's the only safe sex that there is. That's what the CDC will tell you, and that's what the Bible tells you. That's it. Now, suppose we look at what happens when people have sex outside of that relationship, just the physical consequences. Do you know right now, in the United States of America, there are 70 million Americans with a sexually transmitted disease. 19 million new cases every single year, the CDC estimates that there are. 3.8 million teenagers get sexually transmitted diseases every single year. That means 10,000 every single day. That means 1 every 8 seconds. As we've been speaking in the last 4 or 5 minutes, every 8 seconds of that, one person has gotten a sexually transmitted disease. Now, many of these sexually transmitted diseases have absolutely positively no cure. That means you're going to have them for the rest of your life. You might not see them for a year, after you have your sexual encounter. You might not see them for 2 or 3 years. They might wait for 5 or 10 years to pop up. And if you are never tested, you won't even know that you have it for 10 years. And then 10 years, you'll find out you've got a virus that is going to sometimes end in your death, sometimes going to end in the death of a child that you're going to give birth to. Sometimes it's going to be passed to your spouse that you have married 10 years after the fact because you never got tested and you didn't even know that you had a disease. And that spouse is going to react differently to it than you do and going to have all kinds of physical complications because of something that you did 10 years ago that you didn't even know was happening to you in that 10-year period. There is no safe sex outside of a marriage relationship, and the sexually transmitted diseases, those statistics show us that. Did you know that 1 in 4 sexually active teenagers are going to get a sexually transmitted disease this year? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 1 in 4 sexually active teenagers. That means if you are sexually active, you've got a 25% chance of getting a sexually transmitted disease. Now, I don't want to insult your intelligence, but how much of a percent chance do you have if you're not having sex? 0. None. Absolutely nothing. How much of a chance, if you are having sex, do you have of getting a sexually transmitted disease? 25% chance. That means if you had a gun with only 4 cylinders and you stuck a bullet in one of those 4 cylinders and spun it around and stuck it to your head, that's the chance that you've got of getting a sexually transmitted disease this year. Now let's say you make it through this year and you don't get one. Next year, you've got the same chance. So every single year, January 1st, you pull out that gun with 4 cylinders, you stick a bullet in it, you spin it around, you point it at your head every January. Now, if I were to say who wants a 25% chance of getting a sexually transmitted disease, I dare say that most everybody in the audience or in the listening audience would say, I don't want that chance. But then if I were to say who wants to have sex before they're married? Well, it's the very same question. But lots of times people don't put it together like that. Did you know that if you are sexually active as a teenager and you remain so until the age of 25, that 1 out of every 2 people who do that are going to have a sexually transmitted disease? 1 out of 2 who remain sexually active until they're 25. Oh, so that means, let's say at 18 or 19 you decided to start having sex. Now you pull out a gun that's got 2 cylinders and you stick a bullet in one of those and you spin it around and stick it to your head. And there's a 50% chance that you're going to get a sexually transmitted disease. Do you know the Bible knew about what was going to happen physically to a person who had sex before he or she was married? In fact, in Proverbs chapter 5, verses 11 through 17, we read some very powerful things about a young man who decided he was going to have sex before he got married. I want to read you those verses, and I want you to listen very closely. And remember that this book was written in about 960 BC. That means it's about 3,000 years old, but it mentions exactly what happens to many people who contract sexually transmitted diseases in today's society. Listen to what he said. He said this, "And you mourn at last when your flesh and your body are consumed, and say, how I have hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof. I have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to those who instructed me. I was on the verge of total ruin." What does that verse say? My flesh and body are consumed. You see, that's what sexually transmitted diseases are going to do to you. They're going to consume your physical body. Let me show you how that happens. We're going to divide the sexually transmitted diseases up that we're going to talk about into 2 categories: viruses and bacterial sexually transmitted diseases. What is a virus? A virus is something you'll never have a cure for. If you get a virus, you will have that virus for the rest of your life. If I were just to say, what's the most common sexually transmitted virus that everybody knows about? Well, we would probably say HIV/AIDS. HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. Did you know that at a sexual encounter, if a person contracts AIDS, there's a good chance that there won't be a symptom for a year, won't be a symptom for 2 years. In fact, you can't even get tested properly for it until 6 months after the sexual encounter. Oh, but you can pass it for that 6 months, but they won't even know that your body has it until 6 months later. Now, what happens to a person when the HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, goes all the way to AIDS, autoimmune deficiency syndrome? What happens is your body loses the ability to fight any type of infection. So if there's an infection coming around, you're going to get it. Any type of pneumonia, any type of bacterial infection, you're going to get it because your body can't fight it anymore. Many people who get HIV die at a very, very young age. That verse that we read, their flesh and their body is consumed. Their body can no longer fight infection, so often they are lying in a hospital bed with open sores that they cannot heal themselves because their body can't fight the infection that's taking over. Many people die at the age of 25 or 30 or 35. Why is that? For what? Suppose I ask you, would you like to be lying on your deathbed at the age of 35 with open sores that someone has to come and dress every hour or every 2 hours, and they have to flip you over so you don't get bed sores? Who wants that? Anybody want that? Any takers on that? Okay, what about, do you want to have some physical pleasure for about 15 or 20 minutes? Oh, see, people think that's a different question, but it's not a different question. People will trade a few minutes of physical sexual pleasure for the very real chance. 15,000 a year die of HIV. For the very real, 50,000 a year get it. The very real chance of a very early death, and your body can't fight off any infection. Anybody want that? It's not something you can get rid of. There's no vaccine for it. There's no way you can keep yourself from getting it other than not having sex. Will a condom lower your chances of getting it? Yes. Will it make it safe? Absolutely, positively not. Let's look at another sexually transmitted virus. HPV, also known as the human papillomavirus, or genital warts. Now, the thing about human papillomavirus is it's one of, if not the most common viruses in the world. It's spread very, very easily. The thing about HPV is it's spread by physical contact, skin to skin contact. So that if a person is wearing a condom, that doesn't protect a person from getting HPV, because any genital touching of the skin can pass this particular virus. Now, what happens when a person gets HPV? Many people don't see any symptoms. You don't see symptoms of HPV. Sometimes you wouldn't see a symptom for 6 months, for a year, sometimes 2 years. You might never see a symptom. Other times, a person will get genital warts, and those warts sometimes will be large, sometimes they'll be small. If you want to remove a genital wart, many times you have to go to a doctor and have them lasered off. You have to have them burned off. And you think, well, go burn a genital wart off or two. Okay, go burn one off and then wait another 3 months and go burn them off again, and then you wait another 3 months and you go burn them off again, because you don't stop having the virus. And not only that, it just so happens that when many people can't see their genital warts, especially girls, this especially affects you, those genital warts happen to be internal. They're on your cervix. Now, you don't ever see them on your cervix, but they are there, and they cause cervical cancer. Did you know that 99% of all cervical cancer is linked to HPV, and 4,000 people a year die of cervical cancer because of the HPV that they contracted when they were having sex as teenagers? Now, if I were to say, who wants to die of cervical cancer? Nobody wants to die of cervical cancer. Well, there's a very, very high chance that you're going to get HPV if you are having sex before you're married. And it's one of the very easiest to pass. Maybe you've heard of this one, herpes. Herpes is the most common sexually transmitted disease anywhere. There is no vaccine for it. There is no cure for it. If you get it, you will have it for life. Now listen to me. 45 million to 60 million Americans have herpes. That means 1 out of every 5 people in the United States of America over the age of 12 have herpes. Now I want you to just go to the mall and sit on a chair and watch people walk by and just count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out of those 5 you counted, one of those has herpes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out of those 5 you counted, one of those has herpes. If they're anything like standard, average American statistics. 1 out of every 5 over 12 years old. You say, well, what does herpes do? Well, it just so happens that it can cause very serious blisters and sores that are very painful that reoccur. Like I said, you don't get over herpes. You don't get a fix for herpes. There's no way you go get a shot for herpes. You get herpes and you keep herpes for the rest of your life. Now, it might be the case that you don't know that you have herpes. You might contract herpes because you had an encounter with someone. You don't know that you have it. You don't see any symptoms of it. And you get married. And you give it to your wife. And now she has it. Maybe you've seen those commercials where the medicine is telling you that the guy in the marriage relationship, he's got herpes, and the wife says, and he's been taking this medicine, and I don't have herpes yet. What's the active word there? I don't have it yet. Is there a good chance that you're going to get it? Yeah. Even if you're taking this medicine and using a condom? Yeah. There's a good chance that because you're in a marriage relationship with a guy who has herpes, you don't have it yet, but it's coming. Now, what happens if a girl in the relationship gets herpes? Well, she might have those sores, etc. too, but let's say that she gives birth to a child. And precautions aren't taken. Maybe she didn't know that she had herpes. She gives birth to this child. Do you know what there's a very good chance that's going to happen to that child? That child is going to get meningitis. That child is potentially going to be brain damaged. Or that child is going to die very soon after he is born. I want you to think about this. Suppose that you're a guy who played around and you got married, found the girl of your dreams. She waited for you and you infected her with herpes. And she has a child that she had no way to know she had herpes. She gives birth to that child and he's brain damaged. Now, every time you look into that child's eyes, what are you going to be feeling? Terrible guilt that you are responsible for that child's damage. Can you get forgiveness of having sex before you get married? Absolutely, positively. Will you ever outlive the guilt that you will feel if you look into the eyes of a brain-damaged child for the next 30 or 40 years? You'll never outlive that. And what did you get for it? What were you given for the cost that you had to pay for getting herpes? What were you given? 15 minutes of physical pleasure. And that's it. That's all you got. Is it worth it? I think you will understand that it's absolutely, positively not worth it. If you weren't looking at it from a spiritual standpoint whatsoever, if all you were looking at it was from a physical standpoint, you would never in a million years say that it was worth it to put your child at risk for a few minutes of pleasure. Now, let's move down the list to hepatitis. Hepatitis A, B, and C. There is a vaccine for hepatitis, but many people still contract it in the United States of America. Hepatitis is a liver disease. It attacks your liver. Often it leads to liver cancer, and many times it can cause severe trouble with your liver, and sometimes ultimately it can be fatal. You've got HIV, you've got HPV, you've got herpes, you've got hepatitis A, B, and C, and those are just the majority of the major sexually transmitted viruses. Now, let's move over to the sexually transmitted diseases that are bacterial. You say, well, what's the difference? Well, there's no shot for a virus. Sometimes you can give a vaccine. In fact, there is a HPV vaccine that targets the HPV strain of 6 and 11 and 16 and 18, I believe. You know how many strains of HPV there are? over 100. So that leaves out strain 31, 33, 35, 51, 52, 55, etc. on down the list. So yes, you can get a vaccine for HPV. You can't get a vaccine for HIV. You can't get a vaccine for herpes. You can get a vaccine for hepatitis B and A. When you go to the bacterial sexually transmitted diseases, you don't get vaccines for them. In fact, when you get a bacterial sexually transmitted disease, a shot of penicillin will take care of it. You say, that's great, Kyle. I mean, that's just a shot of penicillin. I mean, you go get a sexually transmitted disease, it's bacterial, you get your shot of penicillin, boom, you're done. Okay, let's see if that's what happens. Let's take the most common bacterial sexually transmitted disease, chlamydia. Most of you have probably heard of chlamydia. You get chlamydia, generally speaking, it's asymptomatic. Here's what that means. You don't know you have it. You know, a girl would say, well, my boyfriend loves me so much, he would never have sex with me if he had a sexually transmitted disease. Number one, most of the time that's absolutely false. But number two, let's say he did love you that much that if he knew he had a sexually transmitted disease, he wouldn't have sex with you. Do you know most of the time he'll never even know that he's got something like chlamydia or gonorrhea? He won't even know he's got it. Now, let me stop right here and say this. A person who truly loved another person would never ask them to jeopardize their life for a few moments of physical pleasure. So when a boy says he loves you, girls, and then tries to pressure you into having sex, he does not love you. Please understand that, because if he really did love you, then he wouldn't be pressuring you to do something that can be potentially fatal to you. Now, let's also remind ourselves in this instance that every single sexually transmitted disease that we have discussed can be transferred through oral sex, through anal sex, through intercourse, or sometimes even through just hand to genital touching. Every single one that we have discussed. So when a person says, well, we're doing other things besides intercourse, well, that's not going to keep you from getting a sexually transmitted disease. In fact, many times, because a person thinks that that stuff will keep them from getting a sexually transmitted disease, they involve themselves in more risky sexual behavior, and they get a sexually transmitted disease from all kinds of things that aren't intercourse. So don't think that, well, because I'm not having intercourse, then I'm not going to get one of these sexually transmitted diseases. That's what some people think. That's simply not the case at all. So we've got chlamydia there. What are some of the possibilities that if you get chlamydia, like I said, it's asymptomatic. In fact, some people call it a silent disease. Now, that means you won't know that you have it. But it doesn't mean it won't make its voice heard later in your life. Girls, here's what's going to happen if you get chlamydia and you don't know it. Even if you know it, if it's left untreated, you have a 25% chance of being sterile. That means you'll never be able to have a child. Now what will happen is you'll get the infection, you won't have any symptoms, there's no way that you'll know that you've got it. If you get it one time, you'll have a 25% chance of being sterile. You get it twice, 50% chance. See, what happens is it attacks the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, and it causes scarring. And many times that scarring will make it where the egg cannot go down into the uterus. Sometimes that scarring will be an obstruction so that when the egg tries to go to the fallopian tube to get to the uterus, it won't make it. And it will stop and lodge right in the fallopian tube, and you'll have what's called an ectopic pregnancy, so that your child will start developing in the fallopian tube. Of course, the fallopian tube isn't designed to develop a child, and many times in that situation, it is fatal for the mother because the child is developing and ruptures the fallopian tube, and there's all kinds of infection, and often the mother dies. And so does the child subsequently. That's from a disease that you never even knew you had, that there weren't any symptoms of. You see, when we talk about these bacterial sexually transmitted diseases, oh yeah, you can get a shot of penicillin and take care of them, but do you know you can get them every single time you have sex? It's not like if you get it once, well, that's all I've only got one chance, I took my penicillin, I'm finished. No, you can get it the next time, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time. You can have it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. It's not something you get and then are done with. There's a chance that you'll get it every single time. Gonorrhea, the same way. Bacterial, Many times it's a silent sexually transmitted disease. You won't even know that you have any symptoms. A guy will pass it to a girl will pass it to a guy. Neither one of them having any idea that they even have it. Will cause often PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, where later on, after you didn't recognize that you had any symptoms, you will have severe pain in your abdomen, or that PID will have caused inflation and swelling and scarring, so that here again with gonorrhea, you will have a very real chance that you will never ever have a child. Now let me ask you this question. What's going to happen when you find the man of your dreams and you decide that you're going to get married? And you do that. You say, I do, he does. You get married. And in your mind, you have always pictured that you're going to have a wonderful, beautiful home, and you're going to have a relationship with your spouse, and you're going to raise beautiful children who love you and who are productive members of society. And you start trying to have a baby. And the first year you can't. A year and a half goes by. You decide to look into some doctor's assistance. And he does a little research on you and comes back to you and asks you a very pointed, blunt question. Do you have were you sexually involved with anybody before you got married? And you've already told your husband that you were, and he knows, and you say, yes, I was. He said, that's what I thought. You have scarring all in your fallopian tubes. You'll never be able to have a child. Probably that was caused by HPV or chlamydia or gonorrhea. You'll never have a baby, which is one of the dreams of just about every single girl who, when she in her mind pictures her relationship with her husband or her family, that's something that is a very real part of it. And because she messed around before she got married, now she never ever has a chance to have her own child. Is that something you want? It's one of the consequences of getting a sexually transmitted disease. Let me give you another one. Syphilis. Maybe you've heard of syphilis. They call syphilis, from what I understand, the great imitator, because the symptoms of syphilis are very similar to other diseases, a rash here or there. You don't really even know that you have syphilis. What can happen when a girl gets syphilis? I want to read to you a statement from the CDC. Now remember, this is the governmental agency of the Center for Disease Control. This has nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with anything scriptural. All this is a documentation of what can happen to a person who has syphilis. Let me read this to you. It says this: the syphilis bacterium can infect the baby of a woman during her pregnancy. Depending on how long a pregnant woman has been infected, she may have a high risk of having a stillbirth, a baby born dead, or of giving birth to a baby who dies shortly after birth. An infected baby may be born without signs or symptoms of disease. However, if not treated immediately, the baby may develop serious problems within a few weeks. Untreated babies may become developmentally delayed, have seizures, or die. Listen to me. Do you want, when you are at the verge of one of the most wonderful things that can possibly happen to you in the world, that you, inside of a loving, supportive marriage relationship, you have a child that for 9 months has been growing inside of you, you've been talking to that child, you have named that child already. That child, just a few months before you give birth to it, dies, and you have a stillborn child? Now let me ask you a very serious question. Whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that you had a stillborn child? Who are you going to blame that on? You can't blame it on the doctors. You can't blame it. Who are you going to blame it on? Well, if you contracted syphilis because you didn't adhere to the biblical rule of one man, one woman for life, there's only one person's fault that it is. And that's your fault. We could go through several other sexually transmitted diseases. We could go with the trichomoniasis. This is one of the most prevalent sexually transmitted diseases. 7.4 million people get it every single year. Let me tell you what's one of the most troubling things about all of these, especially bacterial sexually transmitted diseases. If you have one, there is many times a 5 to 7% more likely, 5 to 7 times rather, more likely chance that you're going to get HIV. So you don't know that you've got gonorrhea. You don't know that you've got chlamydia. You go ahead and have sex with someone and you get HIV because there's a 5 times more likely chance that you're going to get it if you have one of these other chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, you name it, trichomoniasis. Do you want to increase your chances of dying on your deathbed at age 35? I certainly don't think that you do. If you were to ask any person, who in here or who listening to this lesson, who wants a sexually transmitted disease? Who wants to have to wake up on a Saturday morning and wonder because they had not been using their brains and had taken in some alcohol and done some things with their boyfriend that they weren't supposed to do? Wonder if they need to go down to the clinic and get checked. And so they do that. They go down to the free clinic down the road. They don't tell their parents. They get checked and they find out they've got herpes. And they're going to have it for the rest of their life. You want that? Who wants to be in a hospital giving birth to a stillborn child because you contracted syphilis? You want that? You don't want it. But then if you were to ask who wants 30 minutes of intense physical pleasure? Oh, well, someone said, well, I want that. Well, what's the cost for that? A very real chance of you getting a sexually transmitted disease. In fact, if you're sexually active teenager, there's a 25% chance. If you're sexually active till you're 25, there's a 1 in 2% chance. So what's the solution here? There is a very simple solution. It's very easy to understand. It's called delayed gratification. Now, am I going to tell you that having sex before you're married would not be physically enjoyable? Well, for the guy, absolutely positively. For many encounters for the girl, it is not. Sometimes it is. Could it be physically enjoyable for you? Yes, it could. Certainly could. What's it going to cost you? Well, you look at all of those sexually transmitted diseases. You look at the possibility, the potential of pregnancy. That's a very high cost. You see, delayed gratification means you're going to wait on a small pleasure so that you can get something much better. I was reading or hearing a study about some lab rats. It's very easy to understand. There were 2 bars in the cage of the lab rats. In the cage of the lab rats. In one container there was food and the other container had food as well. If the rats hit this particular bar, one tiny piece of food came out. Every time they hit the bar, one piece of food came out. If the rats hit this bar, nothing came out. They hit it again, nothing. They hit it 3 or 4 times, a huge pile of food came out. Do you know which bar the rats hit every single time? When they went over here and found out they weren't getting one tiny little bitty piece of food, they always went to the bar where one tiny little piece of food dropped. If they had just hit this bar a couple more times and waited, they would have had an entire huge pile of food. But they never waited. They always went for that one bar with that tiny little piece of food. You don't want to be a lab rat. You don't want to swap something so valuable and so good and so pure for a tiny little piece of physical enjoyment that's going to be gone in a few minutes. That 80% of all the girls and 60% of all the guys who have ever made the swap, they say it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I was talking to a young man, he was 15 years old. He lived outside of he was playing basketball outside at the apartment complex where I lived. He lived in one of the apartments. I was talking to him about things pertaining to his spiritual life and things that he needed to do or not needed to do in this life. And I asked him a very serious question. I said, if you had $5 and someone said, if you'll hold on to that $5 until tomorrow, I'll give you $100. Would you spend that $5? Or would you hold on to it and wait for 100? Do you know what he said? He said, well, I'd spend that $5. $5 in hand is a whole lot better than $100 in the future. All you had to do was wait one day. One day. But he wouldn't do it. Are you going to have to put up with some things if you decide to wait, if you decide to carry your virginity into marriage? Absolutely. You're going to have to put up with some roommates, maybe in college, who try to tell you that you need to be like them. You're going to have to watch television programs for the next 5 or 10 years that show people hopping in bed together and never show the realistic consequences of that, making it look cool and making it look like there's nothing that's going to happen to you. You're going to have to put up with people maybe making fun of you, and you're going to have to fight some very real physical urges. But what are you going to get for that? You're going to get a relationship with your spouse that is more pure and that is better than anything you could have possibly imagined. Do you know what we have found out? In every study done of sexual fulfillment. Now listen to me. If I were to say, who wants to be sexually fulfilled? Who wants to like their sex life? I think every single one of us would say, well, I certainly do. Do you know who's having the best sex? Now listen to me. Who's having the best sex? It's not the people who have tried it out before marriage. In fact, there are lots of people who say, well, you won't know if you're sexually compatible with a person unless you try it out before marriage. They're not having the best sex. You know who is? Christian women in a monogamous relationship are the ones who are having the best sex, and Christian men. Do you want to have the best sex possible? I do. Well, do exactly what the Bible says. Do exactly what the CDC says will keep you from getting a sexually transmitted disease. Keep yourself pure until marriage. You'll have the best sex that there is. See, what happens oftentimes is when a person has had sex outside of marriage, when they come to the sexual relationship in marriage, they have abused that bond so badly that they can't use it to stick to that spouse. And so they have to go looking, they don't have to, but they do often, go looking elsewhere for fulfillment, and they never find it. Why is that? Because they have abused the sexual bond so badly that they haven't even been able to repair it. You see, God will forgive a person of a sin, but He won't remove the physical and emotional and psychological consequences. You want to have the best sex? Wait until you get married. And there's only one way to do that. One way to do that. Decide right now, this minute, what you will and what you will not do. You see, in the Bible, it's called determining or purposing in your heart. We have several examples of it. Joseph and Daniel. The Bible says Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the food from the king's table. Now what did that mean? That meant before he ever sat down at that table, he had decided, I'm not going to eat the king's food. What's going to happen to you if you don't decide that and you're sitting in the back seat of a car with somebody? It's going to be a little too late then, isn't it? Things are going to start elevating at a pretty rapid speed, and if you've never decided the line that you're going to draw, whatever line you were planning on drawing is going to get crossed. You can't purpose in your heart in the middle of what's going on. You have to do it before it ever happens. But now listen to me. I don't mean saying something to yourself vaguely like, well, I'm just not going to go too far. Oh, well, that's well and good. You're not going to go too far. Well, what in the world does that mean? No, I mean saying something to yourself like this. Write yourself a note. Things I will not do. I will not let a guy touch, and write it down. Or in your mind, make a note. As a guy, I will not touch this. I will not put my hand here. I will not do this. Don't do something vague like I'm not going to go too far. Because who in the world is going to draw that too far line for you? Well, how far is too far? Well, you have to decide exactly what you will and you will not do. And in this course, the way that we have defined sex, any genital touching is going to get you into very serious trouble. Now, you could look at some other biblical words. We're not going to have time to do that. Lasciviousness and licentiousness. That could even include some more things other than that. But you've got to draw the line. Are you willing to make a decision now to keep yourself pure so that you'll get everything God's designed for you? Well, I sure hope you are. What do I have right here? I think most of you can see this. $20 bill. Pretty easy to understand. If I said to you, is this $20 bill valuable? You'd say absolutely. This $20 bill is going to represent you and your sexual relationship. Now it's pure and clean and crisp. Suppose you decide to have sex with someone before you get married. Suppose that, you decide not only just to have sex with one or two people, you decide you're going to have sex with all 3 or 4. You decide you're going to have sex with every guy that tells you that he loves you, or every girl that looks into your eyes and says, you're the strongest, bravest man I've ever seen. And you just decide you're going to have sex with everybody, maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe have sex several times. Now, is this $20 bill as clean as it was before we started that process? Is it as crisp as it was? Does it have wrinkles and tears in it now? Absolutely. You guys still want it? Still worth $20? Still spend at any store that there is? Absolutely. You think that tear will ever come out of it? You think that the wrinkles will ever be ironed out or flattened down? No, this $20 will live the rest of its life with the physical consequences of what I did to it just in the last 2 minutes. But it's still valuable. There are a lot of young men and women who have decided to have sex. If not intercourse, they're technical virgins, which means they've done just about everything else besides intercourse. Does God still value you? Are you still precious to God? Oh, absolutely, positively. In fact, He still values you just exactly as much as He did before you got yourself into that kind of trouble. Let me ask you this question. The wrinkles and the tears in your emotional and physical life, will they ever be removed? No. You'll live with them for the rest of your life. Are you still valuable? Yes. The way to keep yourself pure is to decide right now what you will and you will not do, and to realize that that is what God wants from you because it's best for you. You're valuable to God, and He wants to keep you precious. And I hope that that's what you want for yourself. Sure appreciate you being with us.